Welcome to the Turd Nerds. We are the functional gastroenterology podcast discussing all things poop. Before we take the plunge into today's episode, let us tell you a bit about ourselves. I'm Dr. Rebecca Sand, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist, and I specialize in all things gastroenterology, hormones, and fertility.
I'm Dr. Ami Kapadia, and I'm a medical doctor trained in family medicine and functional medicine with a special interest in gastrointestinal health, food and environmental allergies, and autoimmune disease.
And I'm Dr. Ilana Gurvich, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist who is board certified in naturopathic gastroenterology. I specialize in inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, and other functional digestive disorders. Let's jump into today's episode.
The following discussion is for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat any diseases or conditions. Please consult your doctor before incorporating any of this information into your care. The information presented on this podcast is not medical advice.
Welcome to the Turd Nerds. We are back again with an episode that really affects every single person's practice.
Maybe all of my patients, actually. Pretty close.
I'm also going to say this also affects people who also are not our patients.
like us.
Like us. So the topic that we're doing a deep dive into today that Dr. Kapadia is going to lead us through is fatigue and the GI. Because it is something, our hyper speedy world and our chronically sick world meet head to head with fatigue.
And nutrient deficiencies with the gut. I can't wait.
All right.
Dr. Kapadia, let us know.
Okay, so we know fatigue is one of the most common symptoms that patients come in for in conventional medicine, naturopathic medicine, integrative medicine, all of the above. Everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people are fatigued. So especially in our patients with GI issues, it's always a question of, is it related to malabsorption? Is there a nutrient deficiency, or is it something else? So what we wanted to start with is just kind of a general history to figure out, what could be the possible triggers for fatigue in that person.
So let's start there.
Okay.
With history. What are you asking for? How are you pointing that patient in the right direction?
So we always start with our basic history that we're asking everyone about. So of course we want to know about sleep hygiene. Sometimes they're just not sleeping enough hours. A lot of people, especially if they have kids, they want some downtime in the evening, which is understandable, but it's also cutting into their sleep time. And most people need somewhere between 6 to 10 hours of sleep. It depends kind of where you are on that spectrum, but not many patients are in the 5 to 6 hour range, even if they think they're sort of getting by on that number of hours.
I wish I was, but...
Dr. Matthew Walker, is that
Yes.
the guy? He's the guy who wrote Why You Sleep.
Why You Sleep?
Yeah. He was the one who basically said exactly what you said. There's a very small percent of the population that can get away with 5 to 6 hours, but that percent is very small, and most people assume that they're in it, but actually aren't.
Right. So they may be having fatigue because they aren't sleeping enough.
Yeah.
And then we ask about sleep hygiene. Obviously, if they're not sleeping well or getting good quality sleep, like, do they need earplugs? Do they need blinds? Do they need to wear blue blockers in the evening? Are they on their screens right before bed? So you kind of dive into that whole issue with sleep hygiene.
And then don't forget, are they on their screens in the middle of the night when they wake up?
Right.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about with sleep hygiene, but also, does their partner snore? Like, are there things waking them up at night? Their pets crawling into bed, or
kids, or all of those things.
As somebody who never had a partner who snored and now has a partner who snores, it's a thing.
All of a sudden?
I mean, I think, we've been together a long time as we age.
Maybe they just need earplugs. Okay. And then other things we've talked about with some of our other foundation episodes, if someone is struggling with sleep, are they getting outdoor time, especially in the morning, to help their circadian rhythm?
Yeah, I love that.
Or are they within the 95% of people who have a job where they don't really have time to go outside and so it's not always modifiable, but if it is, they can get some early morning outdoor time to help set their cortisol
so
and melatonin.
Are you kind of just going through like the interview with the patient when they come in and they'll be like, I'm so tired and I can't get through my day, or I have to nap getting through my day? This is sort of the stuff you would ask them in a workup?
Yeah, I may not get to all of these details first right off the bat, but they probably also won't have a yes to all of these questions I'm asking. So we're kind of giving more details depending on if they said, depending on their whole sleep situation for this part of it. And then movement, exercise, stress, all of those things. I think the one night I couldn't sleep in the past 10 years was due to stress, excessive amount of stress. So I know it affects other people in other ways.
I always ask, like, do you have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep?
Yep.
Because I feel like those are very different camps, too.
Yeah, as to how you treat it.
Yeah.
Right. I agree.
I can say that the billions of nights that I haven't been able to sleep were
Same.
generally related to either hormones, because hormones is a thing that we'll
Right.
talk about,
Yeah.
or stress.
Right.
Yeah. And this
Um,
isn't even a sleep episode, right? We're just,
Right. We're just talking about fatigue just
Yeah.
because sleep is so connected
Totally.
to energy levels. And then, of course, like anti-inflammatory diet, sugar intake. I have patients where when they
Right.
stopped eating so much sugar, they slept better. It probably is affecting their insulin regulation. Are they eating too close to bedtime? I know I have patients they wear the Oura ring and they noticed when they eat closer to bedtime, it kind of proved to them that it was affecting their sleep quality.
Yeah, blood sugar is a huge thing
Yeah.
that could affect fatigue that we don't
Right.
even think about, but it is like
and sleep quality.
Yep.
Like,
Right. So
Blood
we should
sugar is
definitely touch
huge.
back on hormones
Yeah.
and blood sugar
Yeah.
as far as treating. But I know one of our sort of tricks is if someone's waking up in the night, we sometimes will have them try a protein snack before bed, even though we say don't eat right before bed, but sometimes people need it for
some
blood
bodies
sugar
need it.
stabilization.
Yeah, for sure.
So not like a handful of nuts or cheese or whatever.
Yep.
I have this one particular patient who had terrible bacterial overgrowth, like really bad SIBO. And she was an elderly woman, and her big symptom was she had uncontrollable gas. She would walk and she would just like walk and fart with no control. Yep.
Oh, no.
And so we went after it. We did a really comprehensive workup. We worked up her for bacterial overgrowth. We treated it appropriately. She had very, very good resolution. But the one thing she could not adhere to is not having that snack before bedtime.
Yeah.
When we were in stage 2 and having this really restricted diet, we tried, and she was like, I'll wake up 3 hours after I go to sleep. But if I have like some
Peanut
snack,
butter.
actually she did better with like oatmeal, like grains, actually,
Yeah.
like a complex
Yeah.
grain.
Fiber.
But it was like her SIBO tolerated it, and she actually could sleep.
Was she post-menopausal?
Oh yeah, wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that pattern hit in, like, perimenopause, postmenopausal people.
Less than
where
like
blood
hormone.
sugar gets really thrown off because of the hormones.
Yep.
And some people really do need that snack before bed to sleep better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like fat and protein. So,
Or carbs, I guess,
yeah.
complex carbohydrates.
Fiber, the good stuff.
Fiber slows down the blood
Right.
sugar.
Right. So it's not just what we're eating, but meal timing, like we talked about, potentially whether or not they need blood sugar stabilization. Those are some of the bigger things. And then we talk about Alana's very big on having protein in the morning, which several years ago when we were working together and I was eating these oat bars and crashing like an hour later, she helped me figure out that wasn't the best option for breakfast.
So what did you add in?
I stopped eating those oat bars.
Oh. But what do you eat for
I
protein?
actually do better if I just don't eat breakfast and eat around 10 or 11.
I'm always
and eat
so
my-
interested in people's breakfasts. 'Cause
I know
struggle with that
breakfast
one.
it's hard to get in two good quality meals. I find it hard to get in two good quality meals in the early part of the day at work. So I do better having like my green tea with coconut milk and almond milk, and then I'll just eat one of my main meals between 10 and noon.
Got it.
I will also say my experience with blood sugar in the morning is very similar, where intermittent fasting seems to work great for me.
Yeah.
In a way that, I bike commute to work. And so when I first started intermittent fasting, because the data on intermittent fasting is so good, like really it's very convincing. And so I remember when I first started biking to work, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to die. I can't. And it's a 3-mile commute. Like I'm not going to die, But then as you get into it, like a week or two into intermittent fasting, you're like, oh, my brain is cleaner.
Yeah.
I feel better. I have more energy. And then I actually just bring a breakfast that's a high protein breakfast to work, and that's
Right.
lunch.
Yep.
And so I've also cut out a meal. And
Yeah.
it does feel good.
It's
Yeah.
a good remedy for fatigue. I see it help a lot of people, but there is that hump you have to kind of get over in
Yep.
the beginning.
And it's definitely not for everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's something about prolonging your fasting state that helps your body regulate blood sugar better.
Yeah, I think
Right.
certain metabolisms
Yes.
do really well with it.
Right.
And then certain others, like
Don't.
my partner, would die.
It doesn't work for everyone.
I would probably murder him as well.
I also want to say that I do think that the diet that you're eating going into intermittent fasting
Right.
also matters, because if it's a
Very
high
true.
processed carb diet,
Yeah.
you're already on a roller coaster that you don't even recognize.
That'll shock the system.
Right,
really
and if
hard.
you're eating too many carbs even at dinner the night before, I've noticed it can affect your blood sugar the next morning, and you might not be that stable.
Totally.
So yeah, there's all these little tricks with if you are crashing, you have to look at what did I eat for breakfast that day, what did I eat last night, all of those
And
different things,
that-
caffeine.
That fatigue constellation of patient is somebody who really is like, I describe that patient as they're riding a roller coaster.
Yeah.
They're up, they're feeling great. All of a sudden something happens and they're down and they're brain fog and they want to lay down and they're tired. So then they go for more sugar and more
Right.
carbs. That is like a constellation of fatigue patients.
Right.
That is different from other constellations.
Who are just fatigued all the time, regardless
Right.
of what they're eating, even if they're eating a really good balanced anti-inflammatory diet.
Yeah, and alcohol at night.
Yep. So that's next on the list. Okay. One of the biggest triggers I see for poor sleep is alcohol.
Yeah.
And I have noticed a change, at least in my patient population, where I feel like the word is out that alcohol is not good for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, my boyfriend Huberman. Thank
like
you for
I feel
preaching.
like in general, we've known this, but there was all those years of resveratrol and this and that, and now I think people know. And at least the patients I've been seeing, I've noticed a change in the past year or two where they just need someone to kind of point it out to them, and they often will agree and say, yeah, I know it's affecting my sleep negatively. Mm-hmm. I do want to cut back and stop. And that's different than what I used to encounter, where there was a lot more resistance. Not that there's never resistance, but I feel like the knowledge is
We're
more
all in
there.
agreement.
Yeah.
It's not good on any level, but it is a good coping mechanism.
Right.
Not sustainable. But
right. So we have to find other coping mechanisms.
So can I just tell you guys about the conversation I had with my sister? My sister lives in London. She lives in the UK.
Does she want you to tell us?
Yeah. She lives in, I mean, my family, we don't have closed. We're very open. She lives in the UK, and she's a nutritional therapist, and she's got her master's in nutrition, right? We're all in healthcare. And I remember having this conversation, basically this conversation, all about alcohol and sleep and health qualities. And I remember saying, well, based on the Canadian data and the US data, they're recommending as a woman, really more as a man, but as a woman, 2 glasses a week tops.
Wow.
And when they're saying the recommendations are 2 glasses a week, they mean dry red wine.
Yeah.
Like it's not beer, it's not liquor, it is dry red wine. And my sister keeps on going, 2 glasses a week? And I was like, yeah, a week. And she was like, a week? And I was like, is that a lot? Like, we kept on going back and forth. And I was finding, like, is that a lot? And she's like, the recommendations in Europe is 1 drink a night.
Yeah.
But they're having those fancy long meals where they're not stressed and walking after. And I don't know. I'm not a frequent traveler to those parts of the world.
Also, my experience of drinking in Europe is serving sizes are much smaller there than they are here. When you get a drink here, it is enormous.
And I will say COVID did make the serving sizes.
And aren't they walking a lot more, especially after meals?
Yeah, I think there are other things mitigating
metabolic effects are likely different than Americans.
Lifestyle's definitely different on average.
I think that once I started making the connection between alcohol and sleep, I can't actually think of anything better than sleep.
Right.
I mean, I can't think of anything better.
Game changer. And also it affects any yeast you've got growing. It affects histamine. It affects like mental health and all these other things that just compound and worsen
the negative
energy
effects.
Levels.
It has a negative impact on the GI tract as well.
Yep.
To connect it back to what we
and
focus on.
And it's inflammatory.
Right.
So for like all the things.
It's not great for the liver.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that constellation of patient. The alcohol constellation. So we're in Portland. We're located in Flushing, which means we actually I have a fair amount of patients, and I think Dr. Sand has even more than I do, of patients who work in the wine industry, in the beer industry. Yeah. And that is a different constellation of patient where they're also fatigued, they're also brain foggy, but they refuse to say that it's due to alcohol. They are very, very hesitant.
I don't see that actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What are you seeing in your constellation?
Yeah, I see people very willing to admit that and really like be motivated, maybe because they're seeing it more, motivated to make some changes around that and really grapple with it. And I will say there are non-alcoholic beers now that are terrific. Like they're very, very good. So I think it's easier now to kind of make this shift.
It's interesting because I'm also like, beer to start with isn't good.
Yeah.
Oh, I love beer. I love hoppy beer. But, I regularly drink the non-alcoholic ones and I think they're awesome. So that's new. Yeah. And
how do you think that affects people's yeast? It's probably the same issue.
Well, if it has sugar, if you get like a dry something, like a dry cider, I don't know if there's a beer equivalent of a dry cider.
Yeah, there's a lot less in them though. So like even the hoppy non-alcoholics have like 60 calories or something. So there's not as much content.
So it would be more if they were allergic to yeast than having a fungal overgrowth.
But they're definitely not as yeasty.
Yeah.
We have our first Otto Brewer syndrome patient.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
But talk about and every time he's an elderly gentleman. He's working with one of my residents. He's an elderly gentleman and he does not want to give up his alcohol. But he is like the amount it's Otto Brewing syndrome. Like he'll have like 2 tablespoons and then he'll be like totally drunk, like wasted. Oof. And then he'll start going crazy and like slurring his words and trying to drive. It's a crazy story.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, alcohol.
All right. Okay, so alcohol is bad. Okay.
Second constellation of patients covered.
Okay. So caffeine is an interesting one because it actually
you're
can
all my favorite things.
I know.
Here.
And I used to I still kind of tiptoe around these recommendations for patients I've just met. But again, I have noticed people are more willing to work on alcohol than caffeine. And I also don't think we need to remove caffeine unless we've sort of exhausted all other options or it's excessive and later in the day. But everyone's different. So with caffeine, though, it's interesting because it could prevent you from falling asleep, but it could also just make you wake up in the night. And then people don't make the connection because they think, oh, I'm falling asleep fine. But it can also cause intermittent awakening and less restful sleep.
Let's back up at what it can do during the day. So from my understanding, the half-life
makes you feel great.
Until it doesn't. It makes you feel great until it doesn't.
I think caffeine's very individual.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that
pretty individualized. Also, coffee versus tea
That's
has
true.
different effects.
But no matter what it is, that substance has a half-life.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
4 to 6 hours.
Right. I heard 8. I heard 6 to 8, but I think people metabolize it differently also.
Right.
But there is a type of fatigue that happens as you're withdrawing from that peak of caffeine.
You just have to drink more then.
That is the problem. And then like I feel like we need to start
until you can go home to take a nap.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to start the conversation. That is true.
Bring you down.
I think we have to start the conversation with the constellation of caffeine fatigue that we are seeing in our patients are those people who are crashing in the afternoon, early evening. Like
could be
4 to 8 hours after they're drinking their caffeine and they're having brain fog. When I'm walking down the clinic and my caffeine is wearing out, other people in the office will be like, oh, is it chocolate o'clock? Because I'm looking for my next caffeine hit. That's also a sugar hit.
Yeah. So I think like people have different relationships with this. I encourage my patients to kind of work it out for themselves and figure out how their body metabolizes caffeine and do an experiment while they drop down. I recommend they drop down for like 2 weeks onto some lower caffeine version, whether it's green tea, yerba mate, chocolate, decaf, something for 2 weeks, and then do no caffeine for 2 weeks. Like do a graded tier and figure it out. Do they get headaches? Do they sleep a lot better? Do they notice absolutely nothing when they reintroduce coffee at the end of that? And just like if there's somebody that can metabolize it, go for it.
Yeah,
there are
it's
benefits.
individualized for sure. And I definitely have patients who don't do well on coffee but do fine on tea. I can't say I have a lot of vice versa of that. There's something in coffee that just doesn't agree with some people, and I don't know quite what it is.
I see the tannins in tea bug people's guts.
Okay.
Yeah, because it makes them cramp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tea, we can't just say tea. There's white tea, there's green tea, there's pu'er.
Yeah.
There's a different oxidation. The only difference between a white tea and a green tea and a black tea is how much it's oxidized. Mm-hmm. And so the caffeine content is not that dissimilar, but the oxidation is dissimilar.
Yeah. So I think that's a good approach to have people experiment. People don't love it when you tell them to go off completely. So again, I typically will hold off on that unless they're either a patient with migraines, they're really having trouble sleeping. Otherwise, we try to have it earlier in the day and figure out their tolerance.
Yeah, I had a doctor tell me to stop it once in school. I was having palpitations. It was probably a good recommendation, but I never went back to see it because that was just cruel.
People don't appreciate it. So if we go through all of that and we still kind of don't have great answers to why someone's fatigued, we want to make sure we go through their medication list, particularly we have a lot of patients on antihistamines. Certain antihistamines like cetirizine tend to be more sedating versus fexofenadine and loratadine. So I think that's a good one that I didn't know about till the last 5 years or so. I thought they were all pretty much non-sedating. So if someone is on antihistamines, maybe switching them up or doing a trial off if that's possible.
I have a great patient story with that. I have a patient who's been seeing me for, 10 years probably. We check in every 6 weeks or something. And all of a sudden she comes in and, the patient always has allergies. That's just kind of her thing. And she comes in and she's like, I'm just so brain foggy and I just can't think and I don't know what's wrong with me. Do you think I have a virus? And it was going on for 3 weeks. And then I'm talking and she was like, oh yeah, I'm using Zyrtec now instead of Allegra. Oh. And that was enough. And I was like, oh, I think that's it. And then we took her off and that was totally it. Yeah. And it would not have occurred to her if we were not having this conversation because people think of it as very benign.
Right. So just pay attention to that. I had a friend, she's still my friend, Allison. In college, all of a sudden she couldn't sleep. And after a couple of weeks, we figured out she was taking the antihistamine with the pseudoephedrine in it because they used to sell it with the D, and she was taking it at night. So make sure you're not on that one.
But yeah,
if you're not sleeping at night, especially not taking that at night. And then supplement side effects. So we give some people cortisol modulating botanicals, and some of those are kind of like down-regulating cortisol, if they're adaptogens or whatever else. And so that could cause fatigue in some people.
And some people have a paradoxical effect too with certain sleep aids,
right?
Of the herbal variety. And that's totally normal to educate your patients about.
Yeah, I think paradoxical effects. I think the take home from this constellation of fatigue patients is, have you taken something new recently?
Yep.
And like recently is within the last month.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of change
something different
that you're kind of looking for? Because it could be that. Just like, let's not think about what happened today or yesterday. Let's think about the constellation. And I will say some of these pharmaceuticals have very, very long half-lives.
Right.
And remember, it takes 5 half-lives to clear something from your system. So like an example is like hydroxyzine has a half-life of 25, 26 hours. If you're just starting out on hydroxyzine, that is an antihistamine as well as a couple of other, things, but it's in your system for 5 days.
Right.
Like, and then you're taking it every night. Your history is like in the last month. What's changed? Either herbal or pharmaceutical.
And ketotifen, now that a lot of us are treating mast cell in patients, it's extremely sedating for some people. And I've had patients that were on whatever dose they were on for like a year or two, and we had to backing off of that help. But it's hard to make the connection sometimes because they've been on it for years and they didn't realize that was contributing. So, and
then it's the cost. Like ketotifen is very effective for what we're using it for.
Right.
But is it worth being sedated?
Right. For your whole day.
Yeah. That's a cost thing. Okay. That's a really interesting episode that we just got over. Let me just talk about what I learned, and then we can just like popcorn if there's more, if anything I missed. So the basics is fatigue can be related to sleep. Fatigue can be related to diet. Fatigue can be related to...
I think in short, you just want to ask a lot of questions on your intake. Look at medications, alcohol, make sure that you're casting a really wide net, and don't forget the gut.
And so the other thing is history.
Yeah.
When in doubt, look at the history.
Yep.
Okay, that was awesome, Ami. That was so good.
We have a huge part 2. We have so much more to talk about.
Okay, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
If you like this episode, please subscribe and don't forget to rate and review us to help spread the Turd Nerd word.